Welcome. We're so excited to have you all here. So my name is Claire Studholm. I'm a youth services librarian at Longmont Public Library. I just have a few brief housekeeping announcements before we welcome our esteemed guest. I first want to thank the Friends of Longmont Library who have helped to make this event possible tonight. I encourage you all to consider becoming a friend of the library. It's an annual donation of $10. To find out more, you can look at the brochures the ushers handed out, or you can go to their website at friendsofthelongmontlibrary.org. A brief Q&A will be held after Dr. Grandin's talk, and hopefully you all saw the question bowls to submit questions we will be taking from there. We're so excited about the community's response. We originally expected about 250 people. Obviously, it has grown. So now, on to why we're all here. In Longmont, we are a diverse community, and at the library, we aim to reach and engage all sorts of minds. And this evening, we are beyond delighted to welcome one of the greatest minds in the world to Longmont. The esteemed Dr. Temple Grandin needs little introduction, as I'm sure you are all aware of her life's work. But nonetheless, her achievements are worth noting. Dr. Grandin is currently a professor of animal sciences at Colorado State University, a worldwide consultant on livestock handling, equipment design, and animal welfare, and she's an unwavering advocate for those with autism. She's an inventor, an innovator, and an author of 12 books and numerous other publications. Dr. Grandin was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine in 2010. And she was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2016. In just a few days from now, she'll be inducted into the 2017 National Women's Hall of Fame. Dr. Grandin is on the autism spectrum herself, and I really think she has shown and continues to show the world the amazing power and insights we can gain from listening to a diversity of perspectives. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Temple Grandin.
It's totally great to be here today. Lots and lots of things to talk about. And I want to talk about the students that are kind of different kinds of kids. And what we got to do is we got to break through the silo. But there's, diagnostic silos. A lot of kids are kind of getting pushed into special ed. And I was just wandering around back here, and let me tell you, they got a great complete program in this high school for theater tech. And that's a field that's not going to get totally replaced by computers. And a lot of the kids that are kind of different, that'd be a perfect thing for them to go into. I was really glad I saw that. So we got to bust down the silos. And the thing I want to ask you is what would happen to some of the great innovators in today's educational system? Many of them had an unconventional career path. How about Jane Goodall with a 2-year secretarial degree? I'm serious, 2-year secretarial degree. Would she have been able to do her famous studies today? How about Thomas Edison, an addled, hyperactive high school dropout? What would happen to him today? Well, he got exposed to a lot of career-relevant things really early. And I was a terrible student, totally terrible. I got kicked out of 9th grade for fighting. And I got sent away to a special boarding school, and for the first 3 years, I took care of the horse barn. And one of the important things I learned there is I learned how to work, really important. And then in the last year I was there, my science teacher came on the scene and got me interested in becoming a scientist. So now school was a pathway to a goal. That's one of the ways you get motivation. It becomes a pathway to a goal. Steven Spielberg, dyslexic, bullied in school, and the only places I wasn't bullied was where there were shared interests, such as horseback riding, model rockets. Yes, and I did make one that looked like the principal. That earned me a few points. And Steven Spielberg was rejected from a top film school because he had lousy grades. Well, he's certainly done really well in film. What saved him was his little Super 8 movie camera. Again, that's exposure to career early on. And if you want to read an interesting book, read about Elon Musk. Very, very successful guy. He also was severely bullied in school and a total nerd. And there's his Dragon spaceship docking with the space station, and its real name is Puff the Magic Dragon. Well, that doesn't sound very professional, so they just changed it to Dragon. Now, why do we do stuff like space exploration and the Viking and the Voyager spacecraft? It's exploration, pure observation. Go out there and find out what's out there. I get kind of emotional about this. You see, get into this whole autism thing. Autism ranges from somebody who never learns to speak and maybe can't dress themselves to Einstein and Steve Jobs, who are probably on the spectrum. And I had a granddad walk up to me at the book table and tell me he was a NASA space scientist, and he found out he's probably on the spectrum. You see, a little bit of autism, you get a NASA space scientist. Too much, you got a lot of problems. We've got to get the video game playing under control. I don't want to got to get it under control. Absolutely have got to. Because what I'm seeing with smart kids is I'm seeing the video game addicts is one path they go down. And the other path I'm seeing are the ones that learn how to work, go on, and they get jobs. That's where I want to see kids going. Because Granddad got a job because Granddad had a paper out. And I got a chance to visit the, I'm going to put the wrong slide up there, a chance to visit the shuttle, not the shuttle, but the Space Station Control Center. Really, really, really cool. Total nerd heaven. And you might wonder, why is there nobody in mission control? Well, I learned a very interesting secret about it while I was there. Well, as the space station goes round and round and round, there's times in the communication where there's a dead spot. You got 6 minutes to go to the restroom. That's what happens. Because even if there was an emergency, you could do nothing about it. You know, I really like visiting these things. You know, why do you do something like going to space? One of the things it does is it turns kids on to science. I'm worried that a lot of kids today aren't getting exposed to enough interesting things. One of the worst things the schools did is taking out all the hands-on classes. I am glad to see that you've got theater here. Really glad to see that. And I looked at your shop you got back there. Well, there's a real need for a lot of people in skilled trades. And all these hurricanes, we're going to need lots of skilled trades. Computers are not going to replace that. We got tons and tons of jobs in skilled trades that are not going to go away. Fixing cars, somebody's going to have to fix the self-driving car. Now, what are some of the common denominators of unique minds that are successful? Grew up with lots of books and learning. I was limited to 1 hour of TV a day, period. Early exposure to career interests. In some school systems, you can learn English, algebra, and sports, and that's about it. That's not too many career options there. Learn to work at an early stage, not too over-specialized. I had a great mentor science teacher, and I did a lot of career-relevant things. This is an interesting paper. The Nobel Prize winner in science was 50% more likely to have an arts and craft hobby than just a regular scientist. Things like painter, musician, dancer, building things. Here's the classes we need to be keeping. Also, all of these kind of classes teach practical problem solving. I talked to a lady about a week ago who ran a therapeutic riding stable. She said she had to teach 4 or 5 teenagers how to put a garden hose on the faucet. I am not kidding. Kids are not observant. Being observant helped me in my work with animals. I'll be talking about that later. And we had a 95% eclipse in Fort Collins. And I discovered something about the eclipse that most of the other students at CSU didn't notice, that the trees made weird shadows shaped like eclipses. I didn't know that. I noticed that. I watched students in front of our library walking right over that. I was a little bit disgusted at how oblivious some of them were to the eclipse, even though we gave out 50,000 pairs of glasses for it. And CSU really tried to get them interested. That's a lot of glasses. Okay, bullied in school, probably on the autistic spectrum. Why is an iPhone easy to use? Because it was designed by an artist, not by a mathematician, an artist. And Einstein didn't have any speech till age 3. Steve, he liked calligraphy, and Einstein played the violin. I'm seeing a lot of kids getting shunted into special ed. Sometimes they get shunted into special ed just to help a school's test scores. Now, the thing I'm interested in is I want to see the student having a good outcome, like a good job in skilled trades, maybe a good job in theater, tech, or some other thing. Met the teacher back there, he says, I just love it. Just talked to him before I came on stage. There are major business people that are dyslexic, like the head of JetBlue, the head of IKEA. And then I also found out that the head of Goldman Sachs was also dyslexic, but he was a good salesman. He sold aluminum siding. He talked his way into a job at a bank because he hitched a ride on a taxi with a guy in a suit. Sort of like the door opened for just a second, he took advantage of that. Let's look at some of the research into creative genius. A lot of them didn't go down a conventional educational path. And I'm seeing too many smart kids getting addicted to video games. They're not learning any programming. Back in the old days, computers would show their guts off, the old DOS stuff. Well, that's my generation. Today's video games don't show their guts off. And kids are not going to learn programming unless somebody introduces it. And you know what? The classes are free online, like code.org, Khan Academy, Coursera. There's all kinds of free classes online. The other thing I learned is I learned how to sell myself with my portfolio. You know, you show your work off rather than yourself. All right, this is one of my most important slides. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. Everything I think about is a picture. I couldn't do algebra. Well, I know now in California, algebra's a gatekeeper. If you can't do algebra, you can't graduate from high school, so what do? Well, you learn some other types of math or something else, and you make your portfolio so good, and then you get a professor at a college interested in you. You go in the back door. I went in the back door into college. Now I studied. And thank goodness, back in '66, algebra wasn't required when I was in college. The national math class in '66 was finite math, tons of statistics. And with tutoring, I could do it. I'm really concerned about that being a gatekeeper. Yes, there's certain majors you need to have that. But in engineering, you need the visual thinkers to go along with the pattern thinker. That's your mathematical thinker. They think in patterns, not pictures. But you need the visual thinkers to prevent messes like Fukushima. I was shocked when I found out why Fukushima melted down. It's not very smart when you live next to the sea to put that super important emergency cooling pump and its electric motor in a non-waterproof basement. Yeah, you heard me right. Watertight doors and it wouldn't have happened. What I've learned is that the mathematical mind doesn't see the water going in there. Something that is so obvious to me. And then you have the verbal facts guys. They're great at specialized retail. Then you got the auditory thinkers. Oh man, they're great at sales. If you sold aluminum siding and you can really yak good at somebody in a taxi going to the airport, you don't know anything about options trading, and you tell them you do, then you spend the whole weekend reading about it, even though it's really hard reading. That's what he did. That's what he did. And this is what Thomas Edison had to say about mathematicians. I'm not a mathematician, but I can always hire a mathematician. But there's a lot of brilliant visual thinkers out there. And you take projects like the Mars rover. You got people in the machine shop that had to build that. They often don't get enough credit for it. And then I went to a real big fancy tech place, and the engineers had gorgeous offices up in the big fancy tower, and they put the drafting department down in the service corridor with the cable trays. I was not happy, because you're not going to be able to do those projects without the people doing the drawing. That's sort of my field. And in my book, The Autistic Brain, I provide science to show that these different kinds of minds really are there. Now, there's a lot of arguments going on about innate ability versus just hard work and learning. Where you tend to really see the different kinds of minds is at the extremes of the spectrum, like an extreme visual thinker, the extreme mathematician. Then there's a whole bunch of people in the middle where, yes, it is just hard work. And then you've got some people like me where algebra just makes no sense at all. Now, here's an example of where over-specialization can hinder problem solving. A top plant scientist researcher said to me that these specialized super brainiac graduate students, they didn't have any creativity. See, there's two parts of science. There's the observation, like the Voyager spacecraft. You want something where an autistic person gets emotional. There is an article in the New York Times Magazine about Ed Stone, 81 years old. I can't even talk about this without crying. He's still running mission control for Voyager. It's been going for 40 years. It's now in a storefront next to a puppy training place. And it's all covered with Star Wars figures. They are still learning from it. And we're going to find out why we are a Class M planet. If you're a Star Trek person, you'll know what that means. Planet that can support life. Why does Ed Stone do it? It's the urge to explore. I can totally relate to that. Totally relate to that. And that gets me choked up. Now, this is what Isaac Azimuth had to say about being too over-specialized. He said, a degree is the first step down a ruinous highway. You don't want to waste it, so you go into doctoral research, and you end up a thoroughgoing ignoramus on everything in the world except for one subdivisional sliver of nothing. I thought that was pretty funny. All right, let's look at artificial intelligence, the things that computers are going to do. And some jobs are really in danger. And artificial intelligence is really good at specialized things. Watch out, dermatologists. You're going to get replaced by a phone app. And there's a phone app that's been developed now. It won't be used in this country, but in developing countries, they'll start using a phone app where they can take a picture of some black spot you've got. And they'll tell you whether you got melanoma or you don't have melanoma. Now, when I read about this, I thought, this is really, really trippy, because this is exactly how I think. It's bottom up. The program learns with specific examples. That's the same thing true in autism. It's an autistic brain. You teach it 2,000 specific examples of absolute verified melanomas, and then 2,000 examples of stuff that's not melanomas. And it learns. Bottom-up thinking. There's also some new research being done with patient records where they're going to develop new drugs simply through bottom-up thinking. See, educators tend to be more top-down. These kids learn by specific example. And top-down thinkers, there tends to be way too much overgeneralization. Way too much. Let me give you a few tips if you're working with young kids that aren't talking. Slow down when you talk to them. Their hearing is bad, even though the ear is fine. They're like a phone on one bar. Slow down so they can hear the auditory detail. Give the kid time to respond. Play turn-taking games. They've got to learn how to take turns. Play turn-taking games. Always give opportunities for using language. Okay, you know the child wants some juice? Then say to them, request what you want. Use your words. Always be giving them a chance to use words. And we're going to have to limit the video games and all the screens and all that stuff down to 1 hour a day, period. I'll tell you something the school did that was really dumb, and I've heard this several times. A kid throws a gigantic fit in class, so they take him down to the principal's office so he can play with the iPad. That's exactly what he wanted. Now, in my work with animals, I found out I was aided by visual thinking, and when I started my work with cattle back in the early 70s, I thought everybody was a visual thinker. Now, I want to emphasize, not everybody on the autism spectrum is a visual thinker. Some are a word thinker, and some are a mathematical thinker. So I noticed stuff like cattle were afraid of a little chain hanging down. Little details that we tend to not see, I saw. Well, it's just like all those students that were walking over the little tiny mini Eclipse shadows. I noticed and they didn't. Visual detail. They might be balking at some reflections on the floor of the alleyway. Now you can see through this, you can see light through it, that's good. They don't like going into the dark. They tend to head towards the light. And I was talking to my students today about a really ridiculous incident that happened about 20 years ago on our campus. A tame Halderbrook heifer got loose at night. The police chased it. You want the police to really mess something up, they'll do it. And so they chased this heifer. and she saw the bright light of a glass dormitory door. Guess what happened? She ran right through it. Then somebody decided to use a master key to put her in a kid's room. And she didn't jump out the window because it was dark. And then the other students started calling up the room, and the heifer went crazy and trashed a guitar and a stereo. Well, that's not the thing to do, but it demonstrates very clearly how they would move towards the light. Non-slip flooring is essential anytime that you're working with animals. They panic when they start to slip. You take your dog into the veterinarian. Why don't you take a rubber-backed bath mat that the puppy's familiar with and put that on the table so your dog doesn't slip. Now, let's see how good you are at observation. How many of you noticed that animal was looking at that sunbeam? Raise your hand. Oh, we're not doing good at all. Okay. See, that's the kind of stuff. Now, when you look at it, you go, well, duh. That's absolutely, totally obvious that the animal is looking at the sunbeam, now that you look at it. But people tend to not see it. You know who does see this? Elementary school children. They see it. Elementary school children tend to think more in pictures. Now, you can teach math different ways. People get too hung up on whether we do phonics or we do whole word or we teach math in different ways. The thing that's important is the outcome. And what I'm seeing now is students coming into college. I'm seeing students coming into college where their writing skills, and I'm not talking about handwriting, is worse than I was in 9th grade when I got kicked out of 9th grade. And one of the reasons why I had good writing skills is my teachers red marked up my work and copy edited it. We got to start doing more of that. And I have found with students that I've got now, I've had to copy edit work. And then another thing I have them do is talk it out loud. Yeah, you need to have good writing skills in business. Okay, there's some really cool origami things. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do that's not expensive. You know how you find this super cool stuff on Google for math teaching? You use the image function, and then you search with math terms like geometry, trigonometry, solid geometry, fractals, and you'll find cool web pages that otherwise you won't find. Now, when I think about something like a church steeple, I see specific ones. And the more church steeples I go out and see, the better my concept. Then I can start to sort them into categories. We've got to get these kids out doing things. And when I asked the physicist about church steeples, he saw a weird motion of people praying. Now, another big problem I had when I went into puberty was anxiety, terrible anxiety. And I found out in brain scans that my fear center was really big. Always ramped up fear center. And taking a low dose of antidepressant drugs really helped me. And I talk about that in my book, Thinking in Pictures. Oh, and by the way, I got lots of cattle books out there, and lots of visual things to look at on that. And when I was in my 20s, you know what 2 things I feared the most? Airplanes and public speaking. And I'm serious. 2 things I do all the time now. And when I gave my first talk in graduate school, I panicked and walked out. And there's a lot of these kids that are on the spectrum that are anxious and shy. Oh, you know what would be the best thing for them? How about a summer at an ice cream shop on the front counter? You know, it's not as hectic as maybe a McDonald's on the front counter. And learn some social skills. And I was white knuckles on airplanes because I had to make an emergency landing one time in a plane when I was a senior in high school. You know what got me out of it? I went on an ancient constellation from the Miami airport that hauled dairy cows to Puerto Rico. She was an old flying junkyard of a plane. I got to ride in the cockpit. I got to read to the flight engineer and help him read his books. He barely could read. That wasn't too good. You gotta remember, this is early 70s. This is a plane that probably had her control cables lubricated in cow pee. And she had a name. She was the cow Connie. We'll just leave it at that. And she got me over being afraid of planes because they had to go from scary to interesting. See, in the brain, in an animal brain, a person's brain, you have the emotion of fear, but there's another emotion of seek. That's what makes people go out and want to keep doing the Voyager spacecraft. So 81-year-old Ed Stone still has, meaning in life. He's still getting good knowledge on his 8-track tapes. And they had to get a microfiche reader off of eBay to read some of the stuff. And I completely can relate to that. They had to make airplanes interesting, to turn on the seek. That's the dopamine system, the urge to explore. And that helps get rid of some of the fear stuff. Also, antidepressant medication, low dose, also helped. But that was a good 8 years after I flew on this old junkyard of a plane. Now let's start doing some things to teach kids how to work. Because Granddad comes up to me, and I had one come up to me tonight, and he said he worked for NASA. He knows he's on the spectrum. Why does Granddad work for NASA? And Junior's addicted to video games. Because they're not learning work skills at an early age. 11-year-old kids, how about walk dogs for the next door neighbors? You got to start doing tasks on a schedule outside the home. About selling cookies, running yard sales, if you belong to church, shaking hands and passing out programs, setting up chairs, volunteering at the community center, helping out with the farmer's market, working at the animal shelter, doing things on a schedule outside the home. Now, when I was a young kid, Mother got me a sewing job at 13, working with a freelance seamstress. She just talked the seamstress into it, loved it. In this state, in Colorado, you can do safe retail jobs at 14. No oil rigs, no meatpacking plants, but you can do safe retail. You need to just make it happen. Horse stall cleaning at 15, I did that for 3 years in a really expensive school of horse barn management. And when I look back on it, I was proud of the fact that I had the responsibility for cleaning 9 stalls every day, putting the horses and the one donkey in and out, feeding them. I really liked that responsibility. Roofing at 16, that's probably illegal but now. Sign painting, and the first sign painting job I did was for a hair salon. Got $10 for it. And I had to make a sign a hair salon would actually want. That's learning how to work. I did carpentry work. I did some college internships. I worked at a research lab one summer, and I worked as an aide for an autistic kid another summer. Then I was out at my aunt's ranch, and she had guests, and yes, I had to wait on tables too. That's learning work skills. And when I was in high school, I made our ski-tail house really pretty. I don't know, this is without the best quality of pictures here. It looked great here on the computer. This brings up another thing. When you show off your portfolio, might want to get something that displays these a bit better. There's a lot of problems now with computer compatibility. I think we've got some of that now. And then when I was getting my master's degree, I was over at the state fair painting dumb signs for the carnival. So how did I get that job? I showed my portfolio to an old sign painter. When you're weird, you sell your portfolio. So what would you do if you couldn't graduate from high school, couldn't do algebra? You get a good enough portfolio together and you put it up on LinkedIn, you're in. Or you send it to the right professor, you're in. I sent a portfolio to Bill Fielding in the late 80s. He's the head of Cargill back then. And since then, I've designed the front end, all the cattle handling facilities for every Cargill plant for beef in North America. Fort Morgan's one of them. I've designed a nice chute system for Greeley. I think it shows up really pretty on Google Earth. It kind of makes me happy. That's doing pretty well for somebody who thought was mentally retarded. And in my early 20s, I had my sign painting truck. Now, what about learning how to drive? That's going to take longer. There's a problem with multitasking. So you're going to need to do 200 miles on dirt roads or some other faraway place to really learn how to operate the vehicle before you go into traffic. A lot of driver's ed shoves them in too fast. You see, at my aunt's ranch, it was 3 miles up to the mailbox and 3 miles back, 6 days a week. That's how I learned how to drive. It's going to take longer. We need a lot more practice before you do any traffic. And I was not over-specialized. And I took some classes in college I thought I was going to hate, but I loved them. I loved my English literature class. It was a broad survey course, lots of different kinds of literature. And the professor explained the emotions, what the author was trying to get across. That was really helpful. I was lucky in my college to have a great animal behavior class from a retired animal behavior professor. I actually looked up Tom Evans online, and I found that he's been referenced in some pretty important foundation animal behavior papers. I was lucky to have him. And then I had all my practical skills. Mentors. I had my aunt out at the ranch. I had Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, and there was a good person in construction that seeked me out. Mentors seek out talent. But a lot of kids get into this whole perfectionism thing. Well, or they also get into real rigid thinking. You know how you can deal with the rigid thinking? You can use mathematics. You can say, well, okay, if I got 12 blocks, and I got to divide them into two sets of, cut it in half, I can make 2 sets of 6. Or I can make 2 sets of 3 together here, and 2 sets of 3 over here. That's solving the problem in a different way. Sometimes using simple examples like that can break down rigid thinking. Another problem is kids that want to destroy really good work. No, you've got to learn how to do stuff for other people. Now, what would happen to me today? We're doing a much better job today working with little kids. And what little kids need is 20 hours a week of one-on-ones, turn-taking games, teaching language. And if I demonstrated today, when I was having dinner, early dinner, I went and stuck my finger in a big piece of a coconut cream pie. I went like this, and I went. Okay, now if I'd done that as a kid, my mother would have said, use the spoon, because other people think that's just disgusting to watch you lick it with your finger. You give the instruction and you explain why. So at a typical meal, you might have 4 or 5 of these teachable moments. Take advantage of them. I had very severe autistic symptoms. And when you look at little kids at 3, they can look pretty bad. Some of them you kind of pull out of it. Then there's some individuals that remain nonverbal that can type. Do not use a laptop. You see, there's a problem in the brain with attention shift. If I punch a key on this laptop, I have to look up here. Doesn't work. You either have to use a tablet, or if you use a desktop, you put the keyboard on a box so it's way up here, and they don't have to do attention shift. Brains with trouble tend to have attention shifting problems and really lousy working memory. So tasks that have sequence, give them a pilot's checklist. I'm lousy at remembering sequence. You just got to do a workaround on that. I would have gotten really good early education today. I would have been a prime candidate for video game addiction. We have got to get that under control. It's 1 hour a day. And if the kid pitches a gigantic fit, yeah, you know what Mother did with me when I pitched a gigantic fit? She put me in my room, and half an hour later, after I calmed down, she said, you can join the family now, but you know the rule. No television tonight. Television was limited to 1 hour a day. And if I pitched one at school, school would call up my mother, and the same rule. And I'm concerned about so much hands-on learning stuff getting taken out of the schools because kids are not seeing enough career options. And I'm seeing too many kids graduating from high school and college that never worked. And they just do terrible in the workplace. I want the transition to the world of work done before they graduate from high school. 2, real jobs under the belt before they graduate. And I'm seeing also too many kids where autism totally defines them. I don't think that granddad that worked for NASA was saying, you know, he didn't know he was autistic, he just knew he was weird. Now, where the diagnosis helps somebody like this is on relationships. That's where it's helpful. Helpful for relationships probably holds them back on jobs because there's a tendency for a lot of parents to do too much stuff for him. Oh, little Tommy has autism. He doesn't have to learn how to shop. Oh, yes, he does have to learn how to shop. And in the last year, I found a 17-year-old, fully verbal kid who looks like he should work for Google, and he'd never gone in a store and bought anything. That's ridiculous. I think some moms can't let go because mom's identity is special needs mom. You know what my mother's identity was? It was theater. Oh, I'm serious. It was. And when I was a little kid, I resented some of her theater stuff. And if it had been explained to me a little bit differently, that mom has her friends and needs to go do stuff with her friends that's fun, I would have accepted it a whole lot better. And when I was a little kid, mother always encouraged my ability in art. Take the thing the kid's good at, build on it. You got a 3rd grader that's good at math? Don't do baby math. If he can do college math in 3rd grade, let him do it. Probably gonna need help with reading, that's for sure. Now here's a scientist's reaction to taking hands-on labs out of the schools. He says practical experiments teach the reality of science with all its frustrations and rewards. You're gonna find out that sometimes your experiment doesn't work. That's the real world. And then I went out and I did all these brain scans. You know, when a new technology comes on the market, I want to go try it. That's the urge to explore, except I'm exploring inner space rather than the Voyager leaving the solar system, but it's the same thing. Huge visual thinking circuit. Not everybody has this. So I got a gigantic visual thinking circuit. And then right here, see if the arrow will show up there. No, it doesn't. You can see some asymmetry there in what's blue. That's pretty well wrecked the algebra department. And some of these kids who can't do algebra need to go to geometry or trig. No, but I'm seeing in California right now, it's a gatekeeper. Yeah, we're screening out all the skilled trade stuff that can like fix the broken water pumping station that got wrecked in Houston. Computer's not going to fix that. Now, one of the reasons why I went in the meat industry, it's a no academic barrier of entry industry. Yeah, you just go in. There are people in movies that start out in the mailroom. The thing about the mailroom is they got to meet all the managers and talk to them. And in '67, algebra wasn't required. And I entered college on probation because I'd failed the SAT. Mother pounded open the back door. So the dean let me in. And I did really well. I got a D in French, but I actually got a D as in beautiful in the finite math class. Boy, did I have to work hard. And I did have to have some tutoring. Now, I grew up in an educated family. Books were important in our life. And I think it's really wonderful what libraries are doing. And that's a library that's supporting this tonight. And we want to really do everything we can to support libraries. Art ability was nurtured. I made kites and helicopters. In fact, I got a new book coming out this spring called Calling All Minds. It's going to be about inventors and just getting kids out making stuff. And Mother read to us. She read to all the kids. And my two favorite books in elementary school were on famous inventors and then Black Beauty, both the child's version and the grown-up version. These are not the actual books. The actual books are long since, 3 moves later, that stuff's all gone. But this is the best I could find on Amazon.com. That was very, very similar to the books that I liked. Yeah, we're going to have lots of books for sale tonight. We want to sell all of those tonight. I rode horses. I worked with cattle. I learned carpentry. I had lots of early exposure to career-relevant stuff. I am finding, when you ask students in any field, how did you get into this field? There was some early exposure to it. Kids get interested in stuff they get exposed to. And I was weird. So how did I sell myself? This is the drawing. Oh, this shows up just terrible on this. That's not a very good portfolio. Usually this one shows up good. The reason why this drawing usually shows up good because it was shrunk on an old-fashioned photographic process I can't get anymore. But I sent that drawing right there to Bill Fielding, and along with that, I sent him this brochure. And then I sent him some plastic pages with some pictures and a couple of articles. What you want in your portfolio is a 30-second wow. So I open that up, you're hired. That's your interview. Some of these kids, we got to short-circuit that interview process. Get in the back door. Everything I've done, I got in the back door. Yep, that's what I've done. And there's a picture of the original dip vat system that I designed. That was shown beautifully in the movie. Showed exactly how I think. I also had mentors that told me I had to clean it up. There's a scene in that movie where my boss slams down the deodorant and says, "You stink, use it." That scene happened. It's okay to be eccentric, but you can't be a filthy, rude slob. It's just that simple. Filthy, rude slob is not acceptable. And some people say, accept us exactly the way we are. We don't have to accept filthy, dirty, rude slob. And at the time that boss did that, I was angry. You know what? I thank him now. I thank that boss. And I thank the secretary, Linda Carter. In fact, I saw her at an autism meeting down in Texas, and I told her in front of a whole bunch of people, "Thank you, Linda Carter, for taking me shopping." Didn't appreciate it at the time, but I do now. And there's the replica of the dip vat system that was designed for the movie. And there are 2 of my jobs starting. And I have found that working with construction has affected how I think, because construction's all about outcomes. It's what you end up with. We just finished building our gorgeous chemistry building and biology building. Oh man, they're getting into great stuff. Material science, biology and chemistry mixed together, genetics and chemistry mixed together. Material science. Man, let me tell you, I learned from a material scientist that there's a whole lot of compounds we have still got to discover. I'm going, wow, that's for the mathematicians. I can remember driving by the Motorola factory on the way to Scottsdale Feed Yard, and I knew I couldn't work there because I didn't have the math. But you need us visual thinkers, because we're going to be really good at risk analysis. You know, like the hospital went ahead and put the generator on the second floor, but they forgot, whoops, the electric panels are in the basement. What do you think happened to the hospital? Like, fried circuits didn't work? That's the sort of thing the visual thinker isn't going to make that kind of mistake. And let's see if this is going to show up nice. Oh, that came out terrible too. That's, I dipped that. Computer compatibility issues, you know, you just don't know. Usually that comes out looking good. That looked terrible. It's not what you want to have in your portfolio. I do have good ones that show up on Grandin.com. My books have got some good copies of the drawings. These pictures are coming out halfway decent. It's showing off your work. When you're weird, you show the work off. So I'd show another picture like that, and maybe another picture like that. And now, half the cattle in this country are handling equipment I designed. Now, when I was young, I used to think I could fix everything with a magical system. The equipment's half the equation. The other half is the management. And in a school, nothing's going to replace good teachers. You've got to have good teachers. I think what I want to do now is I want to just open it up to a whole lot of questions. And we got a mic right there, and I'm going to take some questions just right off here at the front. I think they wrote some questions on some cards.
I have a question here from Paloma.
Let me just have it too, because the problem is there's an echo here.
There's an echo, yep.
Do I like to cook? Actually, I hated cooking. And I was the second girl in 5th grade in my elementary school who was allowed to take wood shop. I loved wood shop and I hated cooking. But then there's going to be some other kid that's going to like the cooking. But you know, and chef is a good field that you can go into. There's a lot of people now going into niche market, all kinds of chef stuff. And that can be a really good career. Okay, who was the person in your life who influenced you the most? All right, let's go through the mentors. Of course, when I was a little kid, it was my mother. And fortunately, the first doctor I was taken to was a neurologist who recommended some intensive speech therapy. And my mother was the very first important mentor. My mother also hired a nanny when I was a little kid who played constant turn-taking games with me and my sister. You got to keep these kids engaged. You can't let them tune out. Then, the next people that were really helpful was my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Deach. She was the head teacher in the elementary school. Old-fashioned, quiet, 50s classroom, 12 kids in a class. The next mentor was Ann out at the ranch. See, different people were important in different parts of my life. And then there was Mr. Carlock, and he actually came on the scene at the end of my time at the boarding school. You see, the movie compressed it. See, I did 3 years of horse barn management. And then what Mr. Carlock did is he gave me projects that now got me interested in studying, because studying was now the path to a goal of becoming a scientist. This is one of the ways you deal with a motivation problem. And then there was a great contracting guy named Jim Uhl with Agate Construction. They're now doing big projects for Arizona Department of Transportation and other stuff. And he seeked me out because he'd seen my drawings and got me to design jobs for him. See, talent will attract mentors too. That's why it's so important for parents to get their kids' stuff on their phone. You know, sell some art gigs for your student. Sometimes with some of the fully verbal kids, we're getting too much medical model. Nope, I want to bust that up. Let's do some really stupid medical model with aircraft that is medically correct. I had a flight, it was out of the Atlanta airport to Jacksonville. And my plane had a really mysterious problem. And for 45 minutes, the mechanics stood around it. And they had big meetings and everything. And then they finally decided that this bird had a micro bleed in the anterior proximal rotary appendage. Okay, you know what part of the plane's messed up? Okay, well, that's good gobbledygook, isn't it? But it's medically accurate gobbledygook for airplanes. In fact, when we're over at the plant and the hydraulics break, you have hemorrhages, and when you have to take the pump apart, it's open heart surgery. And maybe here, let's use engineering terms, because I want to kind of bust you out of the medical silo. Now, you got a fully smart kid, and then I go to Google or I go to Microsoft. And I'm seeing the same people there. They're 10 years older. So one geeky kid's playing video games in the basement, another one's in a great tech job. This is the thing that drives me crazy, because I've been making a point in my work to go across the silos. I'll do a certain amount of pure autism things, then I'm going to do things like this where I kind of mix it all up. And I'm getting to go to NASA again. Yep. That's really fun. What advice do you have for young girls interested in male-dominated fields like robotics? Go in it and be the best you can be. And I was a girl going into cattle feedlots when there were no women working in the yards. They only worked in the office. Ranches had ranchers' wives working with cattle. But in the big feed yards, there were no women. You had to be twice as good. The other thing on robotics, you got a lot of kids that like Legos. Well, when they're 10 or 11, let's introduce real tools. Hammers, hand saws, plumbing parts, take them apart, cut them up with hacksaws and put stuff together with plumbing parts and add that to your robots. I'd go for it, go in it and make yourself really good and make a great portfolio, and maybe you just put your initials on it because there is biases out there. So though you're selling your work rather than yourself, then just be the best that you can do and go out and prove you can do it, and it's gonna be a ton of hard work. Just go do it, okay? A reader of the Longmont Observer. What do you think is important for educators to know about autism? That's a very, very general question. Little kids, you got a 3-year-old that's not talking. I don't care what the diagnosis is. You gotta work with this kid and work with them now. And if you can't get services for some reason, you get volunteers to work with them. I got a book out there called The Way I See It. Whole lot of little short chapters. You gotta teach them words, teach them turn taking, slow down when you talk to these kids, give them time to respond, work with them now. Then you have the Asperger kid where there's no speech delay, and then when he's 10, he's got no friends. Socially awkward. There's a tendency to overgeneralize. And then you have a kid, even though you work with a little one, he doesn't pull out of it. Then you got some that still look bad, but they can learn to type independently. So let's get the iPad out with a text messaging program on it and nothing else. Because what I'm interested in is learning how to communicate. And they won't play in the text messaging program. And that's easier to use than a Word thing. And then when they get older, like these older kids, you got to control the video game playing. And then and they need to start learning working skills, and that needs to start with paper route substitutes at 11. 2 real jobs. You just got to figure out how to get them in those jobs. Go in the back door, talk somebody into saying, "Oh, he's just a little bit socially awkward. Won't you hire him in your little card shop or some other thing, some little independent business? Get them involved in that." And the problem is the word autism is now on such a broad range, from somebody who ought to work in Google to somebody that maybe can't dress themselves. You got the same name, doesn't make much sense. If it was in aviation, it wouldn't make any sense at all. Okay, what advice do you have for family members of autistic adults? How do you encourage them to succeed? First of all, we got to find something that starts to become a goal. Let's say we got that video game addict. You don't just yank them off at cold turkey. You got to replace it with something else. Let's try some auto mechanics. And one of the reasons I'm pushing that is a ton of jobs, tons of jobs. And you just maybe get some retirees. Just start with kids doing fixing lawnmower engines in the garage. 4-H has a really great small engine repair manual. There's a lot of retirees here. They could start a small engine repair club. And then you gradually try to get them interested in that, and then it's more and more engines and less video games. You want to try to get something to be a goal. And playing video games all day let's not let that get started, because it's like a drug. I've got another book, it's not on the book table, it's called The Loving Push. And Deborah Moore and I went over all the research on video games and autism, and it's pretty ugly. Yep, Amazon's got plenty of those, or Barnes & Noble, you can order it from Barnes & Noble too. Given the extent of animal ag industry, what do you think about its ethical treatment of animals and effect on the environment? Animal handling, the thing that I work on, that's gotten better. That's the bright spot. I can remember the bad old days in the 80s and the early 90s. It's electric prodder on every single animal. The National Cattlemen's Beef Association, our trade association in cattle, has an extensive project of teaching people about stockmanship. We're going to be having a class not this Saturday and Friday, but the following week. And that's something that's improved. There's a lot of things that have gotten better. And I think that ag industry is going to split into two segments. You've got big ag, and then you've got all the niche markets. The niche markets get up to about 18%, similar to craft beer. And there's things that big ag can learn. And the thing I thought about a lot of big stuff, people think big is bad. What's bad is badly managed. Big is fragile, no matter what it is, not just ag. We're lucky in this country that we don't have to get our food off the container ship. We're really lucky. We get our Christmas presents off of it, but not our food. That's not true in some other places in the world. We'll just leave it at that. Okay, I just got to get a drink over here. Okay. How does a person know whether their thoughts are in pictures? Okay, let's discuss that. I got to get a drink of water. I don't want to put it up here because I'm a big believer in a separation of water and electronics. And I don't want it to spill on the laptop. So, how do we tell what kind of a thinker a kid is? That usually shows up around 2nd grade, 3rd grade. The visual thinkers like me are little artists. You'll see that. The little mathematicians, that will show up. But if you make them do baby math, then they get bored. It won't show up usually at 2 or 3, but it will tend to show up. And kids that are good at art, we want to encourage them to do lots and lots of different kinds of art, because eventually they got to learn how to use their abilities to do work that people actually want. Paint a sign that somebody wants. Got some other interesting questions there. Okay, please, what's your favorite animal? Well, beef cattle, of course. Absolutely, of course. I too have autism, but I was wondering, what's a piece of advice for speaking in front of crowds? Well, I walked out of my first talk. Good slides. Because then when you panic, I'm not a fan of reading PowerPoint slides, but if you panic, you've got them. Now, I started back in the 35 millimeter slide days, the whole Kodak carousel. And I went out and I took pictures of all kinds of visual stuff that cattle would balk at, and then ways we fixed it. And I'd show these slides. Well, that will help you. You're afraid of public speaking, is you can make a really good PowerPoint presentation. Now, what you want to do is use your slides like keywords in a Google search to get your mind turned on. But if you panic, read your slides. It's not great. And a lot of our students, when they do their first papers, like at a scientific meeting, you got to do a 15-minute abstract paper. You do a 10-minute little talk, and they panic and they read their slides. That's fine. You got to just do it. You got to do it. And good slides are going to make it so it won't be a disaster when you do the first one. What do I do? Advice for an autistic boy going into a not traditional autistic field like acting. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people with autism in acting. You see, to learn social skills, you got to learn how to act in the play. Not just act in the play all the time. Theater could be a great field. I'd encourage it. And the other thing is, live theater is not going to get replaced by computers. Dermatology, radiology, I wouldn't bother going into those fields. Go to school for 8 years so I can get my job taken over by computers. That'd be dumb. But people are still going to need skilled trades. They're going to need teachers. They're going to need nurses. These frontline pediatricians, general practice doctors, your frontline people, we're still going to need that. That's not going to go away. I've been watching the stuff really carefully on where computers are going to take over jobs, and theater's not one of them. And okay, we got this guy right here, played lovely music. Yeah, you can do gigs like this and get paid for it. What books and resources do you find most encouraging or helpful for autistic adults? Well, I have some books for that. One's called The Unwritten Social Rules. I have another one called Different, Not Less. It's 14 old Asperger's, got diagnosed later in life. And they got diagnosed because relationships were a mess. And it gave them insight. In my book, Thinking in Pictures, which is out on the book table, I describe problems with anxiety. There's a whole chapter on that. That could be really helpful. And I got lots of animal books out there too. In one of your past books, you mentioned that black and white animals were more difficult to stay still. Well, basically what it was is that a Holstein cattle can be mostly white or mostly black. And some of the paler animals tend to be more flighty. Another thing I wanted to do for a thesis project in the 70s, and I was told I was stupid, is I wanted to look at heat stress in mostly black Holsteins, half and half black and white and mostly white. You know, the blacks get more heat stress. You all know how hot a black car gets. That's just pure physics. The reader of the Longmont Observer, what's the most frustrating thing that people think about people with autism? Well, I think what we got to do is we got to prove what people with autism can do. This is one of the reasons why professionally I'm a big believer in portfolios. You go in for an interview for computer science, you put out some samples of your code. Put out some samples of something the code does. You show off the stuff you can do. If it's accounting, you show some of that off. I have heard of cases where teenage kids have gone into car dealerships and sold 2 cars in 1 week. They couldn't drive them, but they could demonstrate the electronics, and they were in there selling cars. That's specialized retail. Let's go out and prove what you can do. The other thing is I never told anybody I had autism. I just put really good cattle stuff out there. What are your thoughts on therapeutic horsemanship? For some people, it can be really helpful. What I have found on how people on the autism spectrum relate to animals. The first type, love them. Best buddies, really understand each other. Then there's a second group, a little afraid of them at first, and then they warm up and love them. And then there's a third group where animals are not as appropriate. And that's usually due to sensory. They're afraid the horse might whinny and hurt their ears, or the dog might bark and hurt their ears. And then the animal isn't appropriate. So let's talk about sensory issues like sound sensitivity. So a kid may have a headset. You want to encourage them not to wear it all the time. You wear it all the time, the hearing gets worse. It gets more sensitive. You have it there if you need it. So you're giving the kid control, but you want to try not to wear it. Or something that makes a really loud sound. I talked to a couple of moms. Their kid was terrified of things like an electric leaf thrower and the vacuum cleaner. Now this is something the kid can turn on. And when he can control it, he got to liking those things. Yep, and the modern bathroom, go ahead and put the headset on because you can't control any of that stuff. That's one of like the automatic toilets and stuff, there's no controlling it. Okay, how much longer should we go?
We probably have about like 2 minutes.
2 more minutes? Okay, we'll do one more question. Do you exercise or follow a special diet? Yes, I do 100 sit-ups every night and hate every one of them. And they help me to sleep. It's really important to exercise. And what's been found, and I found for me, a burst of hard exercise for a short period of time does more good than airport walking. Because I decided that I was going to walk out to the economy parking, that didn't do it. It's the burst of hard exercise. And the other thing is don't have a sugar blast for breakfast. Because by 10:30 I'm going to be all lightheaded and terrible. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming.
And thank you so much, Dr. Grandin. Really appreciate it.